I want to talk about something very, very, very interesting and important. It was about this. The world's most valuable company is investing $100 billion into the world's most valuable private company, OpenAI, linking the two titans of the current age of AI. Obviously, upon this news, Nvidia valuation skyrockets, OpenAI private valuation skyrockets, other chip company valuations skyrocket. But it left me and some other analysts with more questions than answers. There's more going on under the hood of this $100 billion deal that I think we all need to take a closer look at. But before we do that, I have to go back a little bit. I have to introduce a third player to this game, and to explain them, I have to start with bicycles. Okay? I want you to imagine that you run a bicycle shop. That means you buy bicycles wholesale from a factory and you sell them to customers with a markup. That's your business. This is how a business reports their earnings. They have a top line called revenue. That's where the amount of money you just made in raw cash. If I sold 5 bicycles for 20 bucks each, I made $100 in revenue. That's your top line, okay? And then on your statement, you will subtract out all your costs. So you might take out wages, 40 bucks, rent, 20 bucks, the bikes themselves from the factory, 30 bucks. And what does that leave you with? Simple math. What does that leave you with? Somebody said 0. That's no, it's not 0. It's $10. $10 of profit, okay? This is your top line, basically your revenue. And this is your bottom line, your profit after you subtract everything, okay? So on an actual balance sheet, it might look like this. Income statement might look like this, okay? But in the world of investing, you either want to be growing your top line, that means selling more bikes, or you want to be growing your profit, your bottom line, by making more profit. It could be cutting costs, it could be raising prices, whatever. But you have to be growing one or the other to show growth to Wall Street to get your stock price to go up. If you're doing badly on both, that means your company's not doing all that great. Now, I want to introduce Oracle, which is now the 15th largest company in the world. Oracle, massive growth company, and its CEO, Larry Ellison, okay? What Oracle does is they build the data centers that other companies rent out to use for AI. They look like this on the inside and this on the outside. Now, what's very interesting about Oracle 5 days ago, when they had a massive stock surge, is they reported their earnings and they did not beat on the top line and they did not beat on the bottom line. They had no revenue growth and no profit growth. And yet, somehow their stock went to the moon. Why is that? Why would that happen? Truly awesome quarter. Stock goes up 30%. They made Ellison, the CEO of the company, the new world's richest man. He passed Elon Musk. Why would that happen? Big question, okay? Why would Oracle rise to rank 14? The answer is not necessarily bubble or necessarily recession indicator or necessarily anything. It was because of a very simple number, their RPO number. During the announcement of their earnings, they said, yeah, we didn't beat our expectations for revenue. Yeah, we didn't beat them for earnings. But what we have is growing RPO, remaining performance obligations, which has been rising and rising and rising. And then they announced this. Now, RPO is things we're gonna do. It's deals we've signed that we haven't been paid for yet, is a very simple way to put it. So what they announced was, hey, look, we're not making more money now, but we have signed some deals where they're gonna pay us $455 billion in the future for data centers we're going to build but haven't built yet. It's deals, okay? It's deals. And when they announced this, the stock went crazy. Holy shit, there's so much revenue coming. It's not here yet, but it's coming. So let's catch back up. These are the 3 players we've introduced so far: OpenAI, Oracle, and Nvidia. Let's just connect the dots here really quick. So OpenAI doesn't build the data centers themselves. They can rent them from companies like Oracle. So OpenAI is the one that signed this deal, by the way. This $300 billion addition came from OpenAI signing a deal to rent some of their data centers. So they are going to give hundreds of billions of dollars to Oracle to rent their data centers. Oracle, when they have to build the data centers, because this is remaining performance, they're going to go to where? To Nvidia. They're going to go and give that $300 billion to Nvidia to buy the GPUs to build the data center. Now, there's one part missing. There's one part missing. Where does OpenAI get the money to pay Oracle to pay Nvidia? Where does this money come from? Because this is a big problem. Again, OpenAI has been searching for ways to finance their $1 trillion AI plan. They don't have the money now. Where do they get the money? And Sam Altman, when asked about it, said this: look, there's always a lot of focus on technological innovation. Everyone's talking about innovating technology. But what really drives progress is we figure out how to innovate financial models. I don't think we figured out the final form of what financing for compute looks like. He wants financial innovation, okay? Well, let's introduce some financial innovation. How do we close this circle? Let's go back to the very first story we talked about. Nvidia to invest $100 billion in OpenAI. Well, that would be a virtuous cycle. Because if Nvidia is going to put money into OpenAI, which is going to rent servers from Oracle, which is going to build servers with Nvidia chips, you've got yourself a real beautiful circle here. An infinite money glitch where all three companies can win. If it reminds you of this image, trust your instincts. But it reminds me of the year 2001. So let's do a magic spell and flash back to 2001, the year of Justin and Brittany and Shrek and 9/11 and Smallville and Lord of the Rings and Destiny's Child, okay? It's 2001, during the height of what became known as the dot-com bubble. Now, we've talked about possible parallels between the internet and AI and the bubbly nature of them and how they're still going to be good technologies, but they're a little early. I'm not going to do that today. I'm talking about a very specific part of the dot-com bubble that allowed it to extend itself beyond its natural life cycle. This is an article from 2002. This wasn't about pets.com. This wasn't about stupid internet startups. This is called the stupid loan bubble. And right after the dot-com bubble imploded, this article was written talking about, hey, there's this really weird part of the dot-com bubble that we should talk about more, the stupid loan bubble. And it was a thing called vendor financing. Now, once I explain what vendor financing is, let me know if it reminds you of anything we've already talked about. Vendor financing, swept up in the free money spirit of the time, businesses were financing not only the customer's purchase of their wares, the switches, routers, and other nuts and bolts of the internet, but the growth of the customer's businesses too. It's kind of like if Ford were loaning customers money to buy cars. Vendor financing was the sickest sign of how things spun out of control in the dot-com bubble. The makers of internet hardware, maybe the makers of AI hardware, effectively helped to expand and extend the life of the bubble, making its collapse all the more painful. It bought them one more year, but we're finding out the cost of that was high. He opines that vendor financing, which is basically paying your customers to buy your own stuff, became a drug because it's a very easy thing for a company to get addicted to because it makes everything look good. It smooths out your revenue growth. Let's go back to present day. Now, we know that Nvidia is putting $100 billion into OpenAI, but they actually have a growing investment portfolio. Is this a drug? Let's look at Nvidia nowadays. So we know about this. We know about this loop, okay? That's just happened a few days ago. But have you heard about Nvidia and CoreWeave? CoreWeave is a company that builds data centers, much like Oracle. Recently, they needed kind of a bailout, a lifeline. Nvidia gave them $6.3 billion. They gave them a $6.3 billion lifeline. So now CoreWeave is getting $6.3 billion from Nvidia. And what is CoreWeave doing with that money? Well, it turns out they're going around and buying the latest Nvidia Blackwell GPUs at scale. Okay? And when they asked about this, when the Financial Times asked about this, he said it's a misunderstanding. Nvidia's not giving us access to GPUs because they have some vested interest in us. But it's just interesting that so many of the customers keeping this AI data center boom going are often finding themselves financed by the very companies they're buying the data center material from. And it doesn't stop there. Nvidia quietly has been minting a new CoreWeave style AI data center unicorn like every few weeks. Just recently in London, there was a company called Inscale, a tiny London-based startup. They raised $1.1 billion in an Nvidia-backed funding round. And what did they do? They buy a bunch of GPUs. Do you see how this pattern is playing out? It's possibly an addiction. Inscale, with $700 million in fresh capital from Nvidia, the world's most valuable company, is now being named as an AI infrastructure partner for Nvidia. Additionally, one of the things Nvidia is doing is guaranteeing if you build out data centers with our GPUs and you can't sell them to somebody, we'll pay. They're offering a backstop, a guarantee to take away the risk for when you build it. In the short term, that looks incredible. In the long term, it leads with a lot of it coming back to Nvidia's paycheck and Nvidia's pocketbook. And in fact, when this Inscale build out was announced, Jensen Huang said, "I look forward to making a fortune off of you," to the CEO. So, okay, let's go back to our original triangle. People are saying, doesn't Nvidia lose some money from all those cycles? That is a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. An astute mind looks at this and goes, wait a minute. OpenAI has salary costs. Oracle has salary costs. If you give them $100 billion, they're not going to actually have $100 billion left over to give to them. It's not going to be one-to-one. You're going to be losing a little bit as the circle goes around. That's very true. The cost of building a 1 gigawatt data center in billions is only 2/3 the GPUs themselves. A lot of it goes to land, construction, and energy. So realistically, Nvidia might give OpenAI $100 billion. They spend $20 billion on salaries, and then $80 billion goes to Oracle. They spend, $20 billion on land and construction, and $60 billion goes back to Nvidia. So there's money being lost in this circle. It's not a forever machine. That's where you come in. You and Wall Street and everybody's 401k that automatically buys the biggest companies. As this machine, as this triangle goes round and round and round, everyone on the outside gets more and more excited and dumps their money in to these growing companies. Here's an example. After Nvidia and OpenAI announced their $100 billion deal, guess what? There's a global chip stock rally. The 401ks pile in, Wall Street piles in, you pile in. That's your money going in. Then when we get to OpenAI, OpenAI gets a private market surge. They're hitting $500, $600 billion valuation. That's money flowing in. Then we get to Oracle. Oracle shares skyrocket as software giant scores massive AI deals with OpenAI. The same $100 billion is flowing around, but it's causing more and more outside money to flow in excitement. The infinite money glitch comes from you and me and our 401ks, okay? They can circle this around forever and we keep pumping money in. That's the scheme. So how does this end? That is the question. So far, it's working great. 100 billion might turn to 200 billion next year, 300 billion next year. They keep moving money around and everyone's happy and there shows growth. How does it end? There's two ways. And I'm going to give the optimistic, happy Jensen way, and I'm going to give the pessimistic, sad Jensen way. The optimistic way, if you were to ask Jensen Huang himself, he spoke about this on a podcast, he would say this circle will go round and round and round with more money going in until OpenAI or one of these companies in the top left here, could be Meta, could be Microsoft, one of these companies gets AGI. And once they get AGI, the profits will be insurmountable and it will all pay for itself. AGI is artificial general intelligence, AI that is smarter than humans at every task. If we get AGI, then all of what I'm saying will sound pretty stupid because this will make untold balloons amounts of money. If we get AGI within the life cycle of before this whole thing goes belly up, then it's all worth it. Then OpenAI's profits will be crazy. They can pay Oracle, can pay Nvidia, and everyone gets paid back. That's the idea. Now, if that doesn't happen, here's the pessimistic take. Here's the more like dotcom bubble take. The dotcom bubble take is that this triangle will break once one of these three cannot make their payments. And I'm pointing to the one I think is most likely. Once one of these three can no longer afford the hundreds of billions of dollars they've promised. Again, They've actually promised like trillions to Oracle and other companies like that, not just 100 billion. They've promised trillions. If they can't make that money, then suddenly Oracle's statements, their earnings statements look bad, and they can't afford to buy more chips, and then it all breaks down, okay? OpenAI currently doesn't make any money. Their CEO is willing to run the loss, but they're losing billions. So eventually, if people stop putting money in, they can't make these payments. Even their CEO, Sam Altman, said, somebody is going to lose a phenomenal amount of money. When bubbles happen, smart people get overexcited about a kernel of truth. There is a kernel of truth. AI is a very powerful technology, but someone somewhere might be getting overexcited about it. Now, the call would be coming from inside the house because you are currently losing a lot of money. The CEO of Alibaba is saying, beware a swelling bubble in AI data centers. I start to get worried when people are building data centers out on spec. That means they're building it out without having the money from their customer yet, which is exactly what's happening with Oracle. But Mark Zuckerberg is telling us there's nothing to worry about. A few billion here or there won't matter to get where we're going.
I do think that there's definitely a possibility, at least empirically based on past large infrastructure buildouts and how they led to bubbles, that something like that would happen here. From Meta's perspective, I think the strategy is actually pretty simple. No one knows when superintelligence is going to be possible. Let's say that you weren't sure if it was going to be 3 or 5 years. Like in a conservative business situation, maybe you'd like hedge building out your infrastructure because you're worried that if you build it out assuming it's going to be 3 years and it takes 5, then you've lost, maybe a couple $100 billion or something. What I'd say is I actually think the risk is higher on the other side. If you build too slowly, and then superintelligence is possible in 3 years, but you built it out assuming it would be there in 5 years, then you're just out of position.
Then you're screwed. As long as people like Zuck still exist, and they're willing to throw hundreds of billions of dollars and possibly lose it for the fear that they'll be too late to AGI, then I think this cycle can keep going. But if that cracks for a moment, it feels like this triangle is is really inflating something we haven't seen before in human history. But until then, as long as Zuck's partying, then we have to party on like it's 2001. Thanks for watching.